Okay, my fifth question was, it just says incest. What do you think about incest?
I feel like this intro segment kind of sucked.
I'm too in vacation mode. I'm just too chill. I'm like, I don't have any opinions about anything. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, no. Welcome back to another episode of Increments. I'm one half of your handsome hosts, Vaden Mastrani, and in the Dominican Republic, dancing it up with the Dominicans, we got Benjamin Bonesaw Chug.
Oh, this is
a great one.
This is the beginning of my wrestling career. I like it.
Bonesaw Chug. We're on YouTube. We're on Discord. Send us an email to get into the Discord. Patreon. Send us a bunch of money on Patreon, please. We need it. Gotta fund Ben's vacations around the world here. And what are we doing today? Today is our 100th episode. Congratulations! Yeah. So we're doing a bit of a 100th episode retrospective. And what's the gimmick? So we have a bit of a gimmick for this episode. Maybe Ben, you want to explain the gimmick, and we'll jump into it.
Yeah, so I think we're just going to each give each other 5 or 6 random topics that we haven't discussed, that we haven't touched previously on the podcast. So hopefully we don't actually know each other's opinions about it. I'm not sure how successful I was in coming up with my subjects, but hopefully it brings out some new feisty sides of,
nice.
Of you.
Okay.
That would be nice. And I think we get points to be cashed out in some undetermined way if we can relate the subjects in some way back to some episode or some subject that we've talked about previously on the podcast.
So the push incentive is we're trying to force each other to talk about new things. And then the pull incentive is that we also are trying to get the listeners to listen to our back catalog and do a bit of like reflective retrospective for number 100. No. I think my questions were more on the let's get to know Ben side of things. And I guess yours are more on the let's debate this subject side of things. So that'll be an interesting.
Do we get any bonus points if it's a Patreon episode?
I think so.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we're gonna have to let the audience tally them all up, but we'll see.
Okay, so topic 1. I don't even know if you'll have heard of this person. I only heard about them recently, which shows you how out of the general loop I am. Do you know who Clavicular is?
No, I don't.
Way to blow my first topic. Oh my God, dude.
Well, maybe just say a little bit about.
There's the 3 teenage girls in our audience are extremely disappointed in your answer. Have you heard of the looksmaxxing trend?
Yes, I have. Okay, I've seen that, and I've seen the like Gen Z boys hitting themselves in the face with hammers.
Okay.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's
Sweet.
One of the progenitors maybe of that sort of movement, or at least is its sort of face, I think. Yeah. So he's like one of the guys hitting himself with hammers and chewing them. They like chew really tough gum for hours a day
in order to get
their jawline. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll change the topic away from clavicular in particular to looksmaxxing in general. What's your take on looksmaxxing? As someone who just figured out to wear white shoes, now I can see it.
As a beneficiary of the looksmaxxing movement, this is what is produced, boys. This is what is produced.
The man went from liquid detergent to real face wash, and now.
Yeah, I mean, my looksmaxxing is grow a beard to hide my face as much as possible, and that seemed to have worked a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about it. I just have seen a few memes. It just seems like, I don't know, stuff 19-year-old Chads would do. I would be very curious to know if there's any data on like hitting yourself in the face with a hammer, if it makes you have a more chiseled jawline. But I think this is, I don't know, maybe similar to like the pickup movement and like the early or medium 2000s, like whatever the game came out, where maybe it's fun and cute when you're 19, but when you become 30, 31, it starts to lose its appeal pretty quickly. So I don't know. Like I think know more about it because honestly, to be fair, What was the line that one of the guys said at Ratfest, that you're surprisingly Chad?
Yeah. I come across as not Chad at all on camera.
Yeah, but then you go home and you hit yourself in the face with a hammer.
Exactly, yeah. Whenever I'm unprepared for an episode, that's what's happened. I've just been spending hours hitting myself.
Well, so maybe I think you probably know a bit more about the looksmaxxing movement. So tell me and tell the audience a bit about what it is for those who haven't heard about it.
So I don't know much about it. So everything I say could be wrong, but the basic idea is exactly what it sounds like. So it's people who have come to the conclusion that, I guess, your looks determine much of your social standing, and are therefore determined to make themselves look as good as possible. And they do this by not only, it's a variety of things they'll do. So they'll do healthy things like go to the gym and whatnot. So in that sense, it's good. I think they're very pro plastic surgery. So I think they're like ready to modify basically everything about their, especially their facial appearance. And then they also do weird things that I think the evidence is not quite in on whether this stuff works. But yeah, so that hammer hitting in the face, I think the idea is that you very subtly crack the bones, I guess, in your cheeks so that they then swell. And then when they recover, they're just that much bigger. So sort of like micro tears, but in your facial structure instead of your muscles. And then they'll, try and obtain a chiseled jawline by chewing very difficult foods for hours a day. I think sort of the obvious take is that there are both healthy and unhealthy sides of it. And probably the community is veering in the more unhealthy direction. But I just find it to be a very interesting subculture within the broader culture, because there are like there's an increasing subculture of people like drinking less, having less sex, etc. But then there's this sort of like look-maxing undercurrent. But it's also look-maxing, I think, is sort of associated with the right and sort of young Republican style stuff. But then on that side, you also have the groypers, who are would be very anti-looks-maxing, because they basically rejected the entire project of getting with women, etc. in the first place. But then these all mix together in some bizarre way that I don't understand. What got me interested in it originally was that I believe 2 or so months ago, there was this video circulating of the most bizarre cast of, for lack of a better word, right-wing characters all going to a club together, but all seemingly from very different subcultures. So I think that was Clavicular, and then Andrew Tate, and then Nick Fuentes. And that's already bizarre, right? Because he's been like, I'm a virgin and I don't even want to get with women. And then you have Clavicular and Andrew Tate, who want to be surrounded by women all the time. And then, some other people I don't remember. And they've rolled up to this club and playing Hitler, or the Hail Hitler song by Kanye, right? And it's just, I realized at this moment that there were like a lot of social dynamics at play in the culture at the moment that I really didn't understand. Like, I don't even understand how all these people are, what are they talking about? I don't understand what a lot of them have in common,
Yeah. Actually, no, I think that they probably have in common being large influencers of a bunch of credulous men in particular. And I imagine that it's like celebrities getting together, even if they have nothing in common on the outside. Just the very fact they are celebrities means that they have much more in common than getting together with and hanging out with just the common person. And they all hate the left. Would be the major uniting factor there. Strikes me that like look-maxing in 50, 60 years, anthropologists will look at that similar to how we in the West look at those National Geographic magazines where there's the tribes that put like 50 rings on their neck in order to make their necks like super large. And it's like, this is just an uncomfortable thing to do. But if it's fulfilling the beauty standards in the community, then you're going to do it. There's also something so like ephemeral about focusing on your looks. And maybe this is a self-serving comment where like, I hate going to the gym, as we've talked about. But part of the reason I hate going to the gym is it's like if I read a book and then I had to keep rereading that book every 2 weeks, otherwise I'd completely forget it again. That's what I feel about like going to the gym. It's like I'd much rather spend time doing stuff that will accumulate and be permanent for the rest of my life, rather than having to just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And if you stop doing it, you lose all your progress. Obviously, I'm being a bit sarcastic with the gym comments, but like focusing on looks, like you are going to have 10 years maybe. Yeah. And then like, what have you spent your 20s doing, right? Like the 20s are your time when you should be like developing skills and relationships and communities that you're going to have for the rest of your life. And if most of your time is spent hitting yourself in the face with a hammer, maybe you're not using your day to the most optimal possible way.
Yeah. I have one prediction that just occurred to me with respect to this movement, which is that they'll actually end up deviating from sort of traditional beauty standards relatively quickly, because I think these cultures have a way of becoming insular and then decoupling like their preferences from sort of the original impetus, which presumably was to look good in a traditional sense, like, you know, square jaw, muscular, clean, like clean face, etc. And I think like they have a way of these dynamics like kind of spiral in on themselves, and then it'll be like you want a bigger jaw, and then you want a slightly bigger jaw than that, and then you want really high cheekbones. And my sense is we're going to start seeing people who look sort of grotesque by normal standards, but within that subculture are sort of held up as the ideal. So anyway, that's my prediction. We'll see if that pans out.
Yeah, I look forward to following the looksmaxxing movement going forward. Okay, sweet. So, okay, my question for you. This is a bit more of a career question.
Oh, bro.
So in about, let's say like a 6 month or a year period, roughly, how often do you have random men reaching out to you on your DMs offering to give you $50 if you call them a good boy? And you should probably explain a bit of the context. It's a free, easy point, but you should explain.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy point.
Yeah, I don't think we've actually talked about that in the pod, but it's, to me, the funniest freaking thing that's come out of this whole podcast adventure.
So in the Ayla episode, which is number 66, and it's called fetishes and sex, or
sex research, something, and financial domination. I know financial domination.
Yeah, was that we put all of that in the title? Yeah, maybe. Okay, nice. Yeah, we'll give each of us half a point.
Nice.
Yeah, we talked about financial domination, and I had a couple people.
Well, what is financial domination for?
Financial domination is when you have a relationship between two people, one of whom is the pay pig, who then pays their dom precisely when the dom asks for it. So think about the incentives of that for a second. But they get off on being asked to send money and do things to themselves, often involving bodily harm to their dom. And so, I just had a couple guys reach out to me after after that episode.
I love that so much.
That's where our Patreon funding could come from. That dude. I should get on that.
I just love, like, first of all, I'm a little offended that no one reached out to me. That kind of hurts the old ego a little bit. But I just love, like, 3 or 4 times, or maybe 2 or 3 times, you'd sent me DMs being like, I just got another person reaching out asking me. And we kind of discovered this FinDom thing in prep for the episode, and it's a very real phenomenon. And there are a huge number of people on certain branches of Twitter that just make their living this way. But it's because there's such a big market for it, and I guess this market wants a little piece of you,
Yeah.
So, okay.
I wouldn't take it too personally. I get, I think there's something about me that it must scream gay or something, because I mean, the first night in the Dominican Republic, a guy followed me to the bathroom, and then as I was trying to pee, was propositioning me, and I was like, just trying to laugh and say no simultaneously. Yeah. And he was totally incredulous. He was like, there's no way you're not gay. Let's go to the stall, and gave me all sorts of very colorful options. So it happens. Yeah, it makes you feel better. That happens to me. It's if only women approach me that much. Ladies, you better pick it up, because at some point I'm just going to start saying yes to these fellas.
But it's got to be just that you put like a lot of thought and concern and care into your physical health, which is amazing. And this is very much a gay quality, not as much of a straight.
Personality, flat as hell, but as long as your biceps are pumping, the fellas.
Yeah. Oh, dude, those biceps are pumping.
All right. So, yeah, topic number 2 from my side. I feel like we're not doing very well relaying this back to previous episodes, except for extremely obvious ones.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Slightly more serious note: medical assistance in dying, MAID. In Canada, in particular, maybe, but also feel free to speak about it more generally.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that I've known one person who is close to me, the mother of a friend of mine. I won't use their name just for privacy reasons.
Yeah.
Who did do MAID, and I think it's unbelievably humane. And I would never want to live in a society where you don't have the right to end your life. I feel like that is one of the most fundamental rights. There's all these like you have to fill out a form, or maybe it's like click a button or something, but you have to do it something like 6 times. So they make you say, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" So it's like a password protection thing, except you have to enter your password 6 times.
Yeah.
She had cancer that was not treatable, and at a certain point, she just didn't want to keep subjecting her kids to this. It's unfortunate that it's even controversial. I haven't come across any instances where it has been abused. There's all sorts of I don't want to say safety measures. Maybe that's strange terminology, but there's all sorts of preventative measures to make sure that people who undergo it are making the right decision, and they thought through it carefully. And yeah,
I think it's interesting. I mean, I have heard, obviously, the concern is that there are perverse incentives at play. For instance, kids will try and force their parents to maybe die earlier so that they can get the inheritance money or something. I think there are concerns about that in Canada, especially from American commentators, from what I've seen. So I think Noah Smith, for instance, has some interesting articles on this. I haven't looked into it, so I'm not sure. My concern is actually mostly from the other direction, which is that it's hard to make it liberal enough. So how these things normally work is that you have to be so-called compos mentis when you say that you want to end your life, meaning you have to be like psychologically with it, and for a significant period of time. You can't be having spells of dementia, for instance, every 5 minutes. You can't have severe Alzheimer's. But often, the people whose lives are the worst, who presumably would want to end their lives were they psychologically all there, are precisely the kinds of people who are suffering severe dementia episodes, every day, every hour.
Yeah.
And so there's this bizarre gray zone you can find yourself in where, while you're feeling well, psychologically well, that is, of course you don't want to sign away the rights to your life, right? But then after you're not doing psychologically well, it's very difficult to do it because, doctors they'll just abdicate the responsibility and say, well, they're not compos mentis, so we can't take their word for it that they actually want to do this, right? It's like being under the influence in some sense.
Yeah.
So basically you have to be very precise while you're psychologically well as to exactly what the conditions are under which you would end your life. And it's very difficult to foresee that, right? Like exactly what those conditions are.
That's interesting. So maybe just a bit of backstory. So for the listeners, my master's thesis was studying Alzheimer's. So it was the project was, can you predict whether or not someone has Alzheimer's or various forms of dementia based on speech, based on text analysis? Studying that, I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, like this is the worst disease ever. And I would absolutely end my life if I was diagnosed with this. And then on your question about like, it's a difficult criteria, like I would want to be able to do something like, I'm going to write a letter and the letter is going to say, once I can no longer remember the names of my children or my partner, or something to that level of specificity, but significance, then that is the time to do the kill switch, because I'm just no longer there anymore. And what's so brutal about Alzheimer's, like I would take cancer or any other disease over Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's comes for your personality first and everything else is fine, but it hollows you out from the inside. And compare that to someone who has cancer, where at least they're still themselves throughout it. So that's an interesting question. I don't know how MAID would work in a dementia case in Canada. Presumably, people have thought about this a little bit, but it is a tough question. I had a follow-up question for you, though. Those American commentators who are concerned about MAID with regards to its potential to be abused, say, are they raising concerns or are they raising cases, like instances where this has happened? Because if there's instances where this has happened, I'd like to read about them, and that may change my view about the legality or the best policies here. But I at least haven't come across any cases. But to be fair, I haven't looked too hard on to find information on the other side of my view. So.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's specific cases, but again, I say this with very low confidence, so we should actually, dive into it. I think it would be a fun topic to talk about, because there are lots of interesting questions about the philosophy of identity as well, right? So if you as a 70-year-old say that, okay, if I can't remember my kids' names for more than 5 minutes in a row, right? Even if you're extremely specific about those criteria, presumably they're going to ask you again once you're actually in that state. And if you're like, even when you're clear-headed at that point, are you actually going to say, yeah, I'm ready to die, right? And then whose opinion matters, the 70-year-old you or the current you? Even if the current you is extremely demented, who knows? And it's like, it's tough. I mean, so it's definitely much more clear-cut in the cases, like you said, of cancer or some like illness that doesn't affect you mentally. But I mean, a lot of old people, because our medicine is getting more and more sophisticated every day, a lot of the most serious diseases now do affect your psychology at some point, right? And it's like, at what point are you? Yeah. Oh, to tie it back to our episode on thought experiments. Thinking through thought experiments, I believe was.
Look at the man go.
Whoa!
Double points. 4 points to 0. Nicely done. Okay, so we started this podcast 5 years ago. I looked up the date. It was May 19th, 2020. It's pretty crazy. You got into your PhD program in that time. You're almost done your PhD. I finished mine. Had 2 kids. A lot of changes have happened. And throughout most of the podcast, I have a bit of a guilt complex here because I kind of like bullied my own interests of Popper and stuff into the pod, just because that was what I was reading, and then it just kind of became like a Popper pod. But it was never
finally he admits it.
Yeah, it was never intended to be a Popper pod. It was more just my obnoxious personality. So it's clear to the audience and clear to us that Popper has had a huge influence on me. But my question is, so what author, what teacher, podcaster, co-host, person, book, etc. Has had a big impact on you and the way you think and the way you view the world that maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about on the pod before? Yeah, it could be anything that's kind of stuck with you that doesn't fit neatly into the subjects we talk about, because unfortunately my interest kind of took over the narrative here.
Yeah, it's I think it's a bit of a tough question for me to answer, to be honest, because I feel like it's very domain specific. I feel like my biggest influence is basically perhaps this is obvious, but perhaps this is true of everyone, just like vary depending on what subject I'm thinking about. So I have very different academic influences in terms of math and probability and statistics than I do, of course, when it comes to literature and whatnot. Shout out to the Do You Even Lit pod for those of you who don't follow that yet. Yeah.
Definite shout out. Yeah.
Yeah. Which has been huge for me, to be honest, to just like very seriously or attempt to seriously engage with a lot of literature that I missed out on in sort of my early 20s and teens and whatnot. Yeah. I could just start with maybe even just podcasts that I consume that we often don't talk about, which is one name that actually hasn't come up for us a lot, but I do listen to all the time, is Robert Wright, who has been very influential on me in an interesting way, in that like I probably disagree with 50% of the stuff that comes out of his mouth, but he's one of those people for me who just comes across as very good faith, I find, and is still willing, even in this increasingly fragmented podcast ecosystem, to talk with people he disagrees with quite often, in not a sort of debate me bro YouTube style, but in an actual like conversational style. Not that things don't get heated and whatnot, but I just find, he's one of the few to sort of still do that in a productive way, and that has been very influential on me.
He was one of the first to start doing it, right? So
yeah.
He was the founder of Blogging Heads, back before podcasting was even a thing. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the impetus there was just he was in a circle of a lot of journalists and a lot of authors, and he would just hop on Zoom calls or Skype calls, maybe back then, and just have chats about the recent articles that they had written or the recent blogs that they had read, and then they just push it online. And so, like, you can listen to a conversation with him in like Hitch, actually, in like 2009. So it goes way back. So yeah, huge shout out to Robert.
Which I thought he actually held his own against Hitch, which is very impressive.
Oh, I thought Hitch crushed him in that one. I thought Hitch crushed him. Because like his geopolitics stuff that I disagree with, like he was very much in the Chomskyite camp of Western intervention is always a bad thing. Like I heard him back in the day, I don't know if he still says it now, but saying things like, well, it's NATO expansion that motivated the Russian invasion into Ukraine and into Georgia. So I don't know if he still has those lines, but he would very much take the Chomskyite stance of whatever happens to the United States is the United States' fault for doing it to other countries in the past. And at least that was part of what him and Hitchens were debating when they had that episode.
Oh, I was thinking the debate on religion, actually, that they had. I didn't hear their ones on geopolitics, but...
yeah, he had one about the Iraq War.
Anyway, even what you just said, I think, is sort of an unfair reading of his position,
okay.
actually, but I don't know how long we want to spend debating this. For instance, so he would never say, so he would argue like what Putin did was wrong and a clear transgression of international law, and like he should be held accountable.
Yeah, he always
territory back,
clears his throat doing that. Yeah.
Well, no, he's just making the point that like you can simultaneously recognize that the act was evil and illegal, but you can also talk sensibly about what the actual causes were. And so, like, you have to put yourself in Putin's shoes and, like, ask yourself, under his worldview, what did he want and what would have caused him to invade Ukraine? And his claim is that, yeah, the sort of the expansion of NATO was one huge cause there. And we'll cite, like, very many speeches in which Putin kept saying, if you keep expanding NATO, like, I'm gonna go to war, et cetera. And this is a red line for me. This is a red line for me. And so you can simultaneously argue, like, maybe that shouldn't be a red line, or we should do it anyway. But you should also just recognize that, like, well, if he's keeps saying that, you should probably, unless you can maybe convince yourself he's just playing some incentive game where he's not going to invade Ukraine. But you shouldn't act completely surprised that if you keep expanding NATO, that he's gonna invade Ukraine, right? And again, you can simultaneously hold that position, which is just a view about people's psychology and like what people are going to do and whether they're telling the truth or not, and then also hold them to account for doing it. So yeah, it's much less of a normative claim than a claim about like, okay, we should have probably seen this coming, and we can't act all surprised that this happened.
I do disagree with that, but I'll save my objections for future episode.
Interesting.
Also, people should. I think the most recent episode with Sam Harris and Gary Kasparov talk about this a little bit. The Ukraine NATO expansion stuff, and so maybe you can just send listeners there for more info. Nice, yeah. So that was in the podcast domain. Any other names you wanna drop or?
Yeah, I mean, I was just actually looking through my podcast feed here to be like, what do I often listen to? Obviously, Very Bad Wizards is a big one for me when it comes to art and culture and literature. And then I have like sort of the amateur econ progress study side of me. So there I've been super influenced by the sort of Tyler Cowen, Alex Tabarrok, Marginal Revolution crowd, which is, they all hold slightly different views, but you might maybe broadly characterize as very libertarian and sympathetic. And that's definitely informed lots of my views about, sort of where the economy's gone wrong and how big of a slowdown America's had relative to perhaps what it should, and like how important economic growth is and all that stuff. And then sort of that ties into maybe the pinker Hans Rosling side of me, which is, which we have obviously talked about on the podcast, so all the Enlightenment now stuff and progress and whatnot. And maybe Harris is also somewhere in that camp.
Can I just say shout out to one of our AMA episodes where both of us give a list of influences? I think that happened in AMA 4. I'm going to take a half a point on shouting out AMA episodes, but I don't know which one.
That's crazy. Nice.
I don't think I'm right about that. It's one of the AMA ones. So give me a tenth of a point for getting close. Yeah, interesting. And then what about literature? And maybe say a little bit about Do You Even Lit? Which doesn't make me insecure at all. I'm so happy that you have a podcast and super cool buddies. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not bothered. Yeah. But shout out to that pod. It's great. I listen periodically, not to every episode, but you guys have been crushing the literature these days. And so, yeah, maybe just a little plug.
Yeah, I can't believe anyone listens, honestly. We're not really... At one point, we were trying to sell it as an actual product, but now we've realized that, no, we're not going to do that. So we just record ourselves talking about books and then put it live, and those who want to listen can listen. And my sense is it's a much better product if you've actually read the book or are reading the book on your own and then want to follow along. I don't think we do a great job of summarizing things if you haven't read it. If you haven't read it, I don't think you'll be totally satisfied. But just me and some sexy Kiwis get together. We talk books. We talk philosophy. We shoehorn a lot of our own philosophy right in there. But I think that's how it should be probably when it comes to literature. Yeah.
Oh, check out This Point Harvest. And Rich has been on 2 Patreon episodes and 1 main episode too. Right? He was on their When Baze Bites Back. Don't know the episode number, but episode title at least. And 2 Patreon episodes where we talk about EA and vegetarianism. Do we talk about AI, EA?
We talk about animal suffering, but that's in one of the Patreon ones, I think. Right? Yeah, and then we talk about Bayesianism on the main feed. Yeah, but also I should also just say that maybe people don't realize it because we prep for an episode and then come prepared with talking points or opinions. But I mean, this just like us doing this has hugely influenced and changed my worldview on a whole wide variety of subjects. So, most of the things I haven't thought about in depth until we tackle them on the podcast, which is why, sometimes I'm always taking back what I said or I get confused in the middle of it because I'm thinking through it often for the first or second time. But I wouldn't have nearly sort of the same opinions on subjects if we weren't covering them on the podcast, because it forces me to read stuff I wouldn't have read otherwise. And then debating with you obviously changes my mind quite frequently. And so, I mean, this is, just and we've covered quite a variety of topics and we'll hopefully continue to do so. So this has been like a huge expansion, let's say, of my intellectual horizons, to be a bit pompous about it. But yeah.
No, 100%, dude. Yeah, no, you and me both. I mean, like the gold standard for learning something for me now is, I have to talk about it with Ben in about a week and a half because I know that anything I say is going to be rightly challenged and criticized and thought about. And so that forces me to really have to understand something. I wasn't going to ask this question because you'll get too many points by answering it, but I am a little curious, and maybe for people who are listening to this episode to us for the first time. So we talk about Popper a lot. I'm not going to ask you to explain Popperian worldview or reasoning. That's too much right now. But see our Doom Debates episode where you do explain that.
Oh,
boom! Another point. Yeah.
What's it called?
Is P Doom? No shit. I don't remember. Is P Doom?
I think you're right. Is P Doom meaningful? Right?
Is P Doom meaningful? Okay. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But so, how has the Popperian worldview just like changed your, let's say, your day to day? Because one of the things I love about it so much is just its application to meetings, to parenting, to interactions with your friends, to every mundane subject in your life. Or at least I find it to have applications there. And so, like, we could talk about how studying Popper has forced us to think more about, say, Bayesianism or more about history. But I want to separate out those more like academic subjects from just the more practical everyday. And I'm wondering if it has, in fact, impacted your practical everyday, or if maybe I'm overselling it a bit, and that's not been the biggest application for you.
Yeah, I think we actually probably differ on this front. So I feel my day-to-day has been less impacted than just my overall view of specific academic subjects. I think probably on the margin, it's made me more willing to just try things or throw ideas out there, or realize that, like, once you realize that it's sort of trial and error at the bottom, that makes you try a lot of stuff, right? So it's like, when it comes to just research or thinking through ideas with people, now I'm perhaps more liberal about just throwing ideas out there that I know are not going to be perfect at first pass, but that can maybe then be iterated on by me and by friends, right? Just to get things going. So, on the margin, that's probably how it's influenced me outside of the specific intellectual context. But I have found, I think, most of the value in Popper in actually his specific philosophy of science or his arguments re probability, his arguments re historicism, etc., as like lenses on which to view these fields. And my sense is that you actually, like, personality wise, imbue Popper in a way that I don't, maybe.
I have consciously tried. Yeah. I mean, so I had studied Popper for honestly, maybe going on a decade now. I remember when I first started reading the first few pages of Conjectures and Refutations, I was in San Francisco, and living in San Jose, but working in Mountain View, and then partying in San Francisco. But I was in Mountain View at just this little coffee shop because I missed my train, and I remember reading the first chapter when he starts talking about the conspiracy theory of knowledge. I'm like, oh shit, this is good. I'm hooked. I did not expect to be hooked here. But then, so you read it, you do all the academic stuff. That's great. And then at a certain point, like, the realization is that he's talking about an attitude. Basically, that's at the bottom what he's talking about. And so I tried to create a Discord in order to model that attitude. We tried, but I think I could say I am more Discord leaning, and you're more Patreon, YouTube. For sure, yeah. And so at a certain point, because there's some, let's say, prominent Deutschian Popperian figures who talk about it a lot, but don't embody the attitude in the way that I think should be embodied. And you can't just talk about the attitude; you got to kind of demo it. And so that's been a place where I've tried to attempt to create such a culture, and I think it's working fairly well. Where people feel, I hope, I can't speak for everyone there, but people feel comfortable airing and imperfect thoughts, and then feel comfortable having those thoughts challenged, and then doing that to other people. And in this way, we hopefully become less attached to our ideas and more attached to just the shared project of improving all of our understanding through conjecture and refutation. But then in my day-to-day, it's just little things. It's like about how to brush off maybe an insult in a conversation because that insult was just slightly due to me maybe saying something inartfully or snide, as I sometimes do, and keeping the conversation going in a productive, mutually generative fashion. There's one of many different examples I could give. See our AMA episode for more. But yeah, that's kind of would be my answer to that question there. Trying to embody the attitude and create a culture and show that one doesn't have to be attached to one's ideas, and that's okay. You don't need to turn your ideas into your identity, as has been said before. But I think I got like 6 points in that episode. Yeah.
We said 1 point per question. So fuck you. Yeah.
No, but 2 if you get the title, and then infinity if you say Patreon. Yeah.
Okay, topic 3. Man, these topics are a bit dangerous. I don't know if you've heard of this stuff. Okay, topic 3. Yeah, do you know who Alex Honnold is?
Yes, I do. Yes, okay. I did not watch the skyscraper thing, but
okay, but you know about it.
Yeah. No.
Okay, so I'm curious what you think about the ethics of that. So, for background, he has he's this famous free soloer in the rock climbing world, which basically means he climbs mountains without ropes. So, you fall, you die. And he's done some of the biggest free solos in the world, conquering things that no one else had even attempted to free solo before, and things that were thought to be impossible, and things that normal climbers might take actually several days to climb with a bunch of equipment. He'll scale it in sort of a matter of hours just on his own with no equipment. Then, he got married. He has 2 kids now. And then recently he signed a deal with Netflix where he'd climb the largest skyscraper in Taiwan, Taipei 101. It's called. And then, he did that, and Netflix live streamed it. And so I'm curious what people had sort of varying reactions. And I'm curious if you had, once you heard of this, did you have any gut level reaction about the ethics of it?
So let me try to just anticipate what some of the reactions were, which is, how could a big corporation like Netflix encourage someone to do something so dangerous where he could die on live television, and all for them to increase their viewership? I don't know if that's the ethical critique, but I'm sure someone has made a critique like that.
Yeah, that's one of them. The other one is like from his own perspective, like, you have kids, you have a wife, like, is this appropriate to be doing as a young father, basically? Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I put this in the same category as, I don't know, 50 years ago, the guy who walked a tightrope back and forth between the Twin Towers, I think it was. Or just those daredevils who would like launch a motorcycle over a big chasm, or even, I don't know, like professional wrestling, even if it's not death immediately. Like you had Owen Hart die, and you had Chris Benoit, who got so many concussions that he then went homicidal and killed his wife and his kids. So I guess I don't see anything ethically wrong with this that wouldn't also apply to any consensual sport that has significant risks of harm to oneself, even if those risks are a bit slower. I mean, Alex Honnold, so I did watch his other special where he climbed...
he climbed a couple things there, but he climbed Half Dome, which was a big one, and he climbed...
He climbed, listeners fact check me, I think he climbed the photo that comes with the stock MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Like on there's that mountain. Yeah. Was that Half Dome? Okay. Yeah. And he strikes me as someone like I've a good buddy of mine when we were growing up. The man was just born to climb. He just loved climbing. Climbing was the thing he loved more than anything. And when I watched the other Alex Honnold special, that was quite clear that this man just loves to climb. So I would maybe have a problem with it if Netflix grabbed some random dude and treated it like The Biggest Loser, where like, you're not made to do this thing, but we're going to put you in a competition and we're going to train you up to climb the tallest building in the world without ropes. Like, if it's pushing against someone's natural proclivities, I think that's probably unethical. But if it's something that someone wants to do anyway and then can make money and then use that money to feed their kids, even if it's a risky extreme sport, then I think it's ethically at par with other extreme sports.
Yeah, I have battling intuitions. I mean, so one, I don't have much sympathy with the view that says, well, because he's married, he shouldn't do this anymore. Because I think his wife signed up to marry someone whose identity was in part built around free soloing. Okay. So that, I'm like, she kind of knew the contract she was signing in some sense. And so I don't think there's any problems there. I think it does get a bit more complicated when you consider his kids, because, they're not signing up for their dad to sort of undertake these stunts. And it's sort of unclear that the risk reward trade-off is there for me. He's at this point, he's a world famous climber. It's not as if he can't make money any other ways. He's one of the most famous climbers in the world, and surely just royalty gigs at this point would mean they're going to live a pretty happy, comfortable life. So in some ways, he's doing this selfishly in some way because he really likes to do it. And he's getting money, and regardless of whether he fell or not, Netflix was going to pay his family. So you can argue like, okay, well, they're getting something out of it anyway. But, his kids aren't asking him to do this. So that's one intuition. The battling intuition I have is that, well, your kids don't sign up for you to do anything. So how much do you owe your kids? So suppose you have a kid and you're a busy tech CEO and you don't see them that often. Are we going to say that that's also immoral? Or even just an academic who is often working weekends and gets to spend less time with your kids than is ideal? Is that also ethically wrong? And then it starts to get quite complicated, because there's tons of facets of your life that your kids didn't sign up for that are suboptimal from their point of view, but that you need to do one way or another, or that you like to do one way or another, right? Like even if you do jujitsu or something, there's some risk of injury. Like, are your kids totally okay with you doing that, even though it makes you very happy? So yeah, I'm not quite sure how to resolve that issue in my head, right? So there is a spectrum here, and I think he's far enough along the spectrum that there's a reasonable argument to be said that you really don't have to do this, and in some sense this is too risky and you don't need it for your livelihood. So why are you sort of endangering your kids' happiness this directly? And yeah, the exact same critique, as you say, would apply to any extreme sport. And I think that's possibly a valid critique. Do you need to be doing this? But then on the other hand, your kids depend on you, but does that mean you owe them everything in your life? Do you now need to make sure to minimize risk to your own bodily harm at all costs? And the answer there has to be no, because otherwise that's absurd. But I don't know where that line is. And like maybe the line doesn't exist and you can just do anything, but that also feels wrong, right? So I'm not sure how to resolve that tension.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Like I was talking to a friend of mine about just this notion of like, do you feel? So my friend has 2 kids as well. Do you feel like you sacrificed for your kids? And my answer to that is yes. My answer to that is also no. But when I say yes, I'm thinking about, sometimes I have to get up early. Sometimes I can't go out when I want to go out. But that's not really a sacrifice. That's just like, do you sacrifice for your job? Well, no, you have responsibilities, and that's just part of your responsibility. But I think if I had to choose between both of my answers, yes and no, I would lean more to the no side, because I'm comparing myself to couples who have kids and then like never see their friends again, and change their lifestyle radically in order to make their kids as maximally comfortable. Whereas we've just brought our kids into our life, and we would hang out with all of our friends on the weekends, and we continue to hang out with all of our friends on the weekends, just in a place where the kids can be there too. And I just think it's kind of setting yourself up for a slightly resentful relationship with your child if you feel like you can no longer do all the things you love to do when you have had kids. And it's much better, I think, to also take care of yourself as a parent and do stuff that you need to do as a parent, and make sure that you are still like for Helena and I, it's always been very important that we have our individual lives, we have our couple life, and we have our family life. And all 3 of these are equally important. And I wouldn't ever want our couple life to dominate our individual lives, or our family life to dominate our couple lives. And so I don't have an answer to this question of what's the right trade-off, but I think that a wrong trade-off is the mentality that as soon as you have kids, you must sacrifice everything for them. And to not sacrifice everything for your kids is to somehow be selfish or not a good parent. When I think like you need to be a good parent for 50 years. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And thus you absolutely want to be doing stuff that you want to do too as a parent. Because yeah, if Alex had kids and then could no longer do the things he loved to do, then I just feel like that's going to be setting up a bad resentment-based relationship with his children going forward. And it also needn't be that way. But maybe the only bit of clarity I can bring is that while the answer to the question of like how much should you sacrifice for your child is difficult, and each parent's going to have a different answer, I think that you shouldn't sacrifice everything for your child. I think that you can bring your child up well and also take care of yourself and also do stuff that you like to do. And so I don't know how much progress that made, but that's a bit of reflections on having 2 kids.
That was a tough one to relate to any previous episodes. We haven't talked about free soloing much, sadly.
No, well, I got so many points in the previous question that I'm floating high.
Messing me up. Presumably we've talked about parenting before though, right? Surely. You TCS with Louie 10. Did we talk about taking church seriously in that episode?
A little bit. You got a point. You got half a point. Listeners can confirm. It's funny because my questions were more about like, let's talk about Ben's life. And your questions are more about like
I hear about your life all the time, bro.
Yeah.
Get the hell out of here.
That's so funny. So I'm going to keep asking questions about this and things that the audience might not know about you and stuff along these lines.
Dude, the audience knows everything.
So I don't know if the audience knows that you spent a significant amount of time in Africa working at an orphanage. I don't know if we've talked about that before. But something we haven't talked about too much on the pod is that travel is a big part of your life. We talk about it kind of in the guise of academia and the life of a nomadic academic. But you wrote a piece on your blog, which I found quite touching and moving, called On Moving in Community. And you just kind of reflected a little bit about what living in, I think you said like 14 cities and 7 countries, or those numbers might be a bit off. Just kind of reflecting on that as someone going into your 30s, about having spent your 20s on the move. And so to turn this into a question, 2-part. 1A, tell us about your experience living in Africa at an orphanage and what you did there. And 2, just what can someone like myself, who has spent most of his life in one place with a few excursions here and there, learn from someone who has traveled as much as you have and lived in as many different places as you have? Yeah,
so after high school, I didn't go to university right away. I was bad and took a year off. And I used that year to work, make some money. And then I scampered off to backpack around Asia for a couple months. And then I went to live with a friend in Africa, in Malawi, little country beside Tanzania, for 4 or 5 months. So yeah, we were living in a little town called Zomba in Malawi. And it went about exactly how you'd expect it to go for two 18-year-olds living on their own in the middle of Africa. It was absolutely chaotic. And ostensibly, we were there to just help out this very little local, I mean, you can sort of think of it as an orphanage. I think technically it's an orphan care because they didn't actually have the resources to host kids overnight. So kids weren't living there. They'd basically come there like before and after school if they had nowhere else to go. Yeah, I mean, it was a great experience given that we were both 18 and like sort of newly living somewhere away from home for the first time and had to figure out how to do everything. So it was, yeah, very fun and extremely chaotic, as you can imagine. 2 was a good lesson in beating out some of the hubris I think you have at that age where you convince yourself you know how the world works. And so, we show up to this orphan care and we think we can like improve their operations in all these ways. Well, have you considered doing this with the kids and maybe you could teach them this after school, and just like a bunch of stuff that in that cultural context just like was obviously not going to work basically. And it took us a couple months to realize that well, they might politely listen to our suggestions, but we had no we're just seeing a tiny snapshot of what this place is about. And none of our suggestions were very good ones, obviously.
What do you think about the critique? So there was a critique from the left a while ago. I don't know if people still make it. That stuff like, and this isn't exactly what you're doing, but stuff like disaster tourism, where you have a disaster event and then a bunch of Westerners fly in and try to help, or neo-colonial philanthropy, where under the guise of philanthropy, it's really just pushing forth a neo-colonialist agenda. The way I'm talking about it, you can tell I don't find a lot of these critiques too persuasive. Actually, the disaster tourism one is different. I think there's merit there. But I'm just curious what you think about some left-wing activists critiquing you and saying like, you with your white savior complex think you can fly into another country and help, and like you know nothing about the country and you should probably just stay home.
Sometimes they're right, but for the wrong reasons. Like I don't buy like the woke, like, we're just a bunch of whiteys and like we shouldn't try and help anyone because they have their own cultural practices and who's to say what's better. Like a lot of these people want help and they want to be lifted out of poverty. And like, if we can do that, we should obviously do that. And we could snap our fingers and have all these people be rich and wealthy. And that would be fantastic. But some of the spirit of their critique is correct in that offering help is hard. And it's not like, you can go in and think you can do things very naively and like have it backfire and make things worse. And moreover, there are forms of it's often called voluntourism. And I think that's a very valid critique where like, even I think Habitat for Humanity, like can fall into this sort of trap where, sure, like you can go to like Haiti and like build houses for people, but often that comes with like, one, you're taking a bunch of people like don't know how to build houses and expecting them to build houses well. And like, there's horror stories about like what will actually happen is like go build a house and then they'll just knock it down. And then the next group of volunteers will come and like build the same house. And they're just basically paying a bunch of money to the company. And then some of that money the most good that's actually happening there is like not them going there and trying to like build stuff with their hands. It's just like the money they're flooding into the economy. And so in our defense, we did sort of know about that and we're on guard about that. And we're fucking high school students. So we had no money. So our whole thing was to try and just like go and live there. And I had some family connections over there. So we like knew of just this little place who was like, yeah, you can come help us out and like read to kids. And like, we weren't trying to like save anyone's life or like build new houses or stuff. We were just like, well, go help you tutor kids after school for a bit or something. So I think we avoided some of that trap. But I think sort of the woke critique is sometimes right in the practicalities of it, of like aid is hard and you should understand like the cultural context about, if the solutions you're offering are actually going to fit in with like how they do things, but they're wrong in the sense of like, often the underlying current of their criticism is like we're capitalists and they're these like perfect little utopian villages that are like fundamentally socialist, and we're going to go in there with our big capitalist agendas and like radically transform them, and we're going to, all the big evil corporations are going to come in and radically change their lives, which I think is extremely far from the truth. I think if we could make these places more functional and capitalistic, that would basically be all for the good. Functional markets are basically one of the most amazing ways to reduce poverty. So insofar as we can bring functional markets to these places, we should definitely do that.
And how long were you there for? Again?
It was, I think, 4.5 to 5 months or something.
That's awesome.
I kind of forget. I spent my 19th birthday there. I remember that. But yeah, anyway, so that was an interesting experience. And then to the moving stuff, yeah, it's just that I think there's that essay was just about the tension that, if you have sort of my psychological makeup, you want to spend your 20s moving around different places and living in different places, but that comes with some hidden costs that I think are hard to be aware of when you're that young. So I think when you're that young, unless you're very special, you don't really realize the importance of community and like how hard it can be to make really long-lasting friends that are going to be with you for the rest of your life, and how important it is to like cultivate those sorts of friendships even when you're young, so that you still have them when you're 50. And especially when you're in school and stuff, you're meeting people all the time, but that sort of stops. It becomes harder to meet people as you get older, and you can be in a situation, which in some ways I am now, where it's like, if you spent your 20s moving around, now you have no like fundamental home. Right? Like there's no place besides maybe like Calgary, where we're both from, that I like really call home, which is kind of a weird feeling. You start entering your 30s and then like I've, a bunch of friends, yourself included, getting married and having kids and stuff. And you realize like, oh, I'm kind of far away from that milestone in my life. And like, you don't even know where you might return to, because you've lived in all these different places. And then you have, in some sense it's great because you have friends all over the world in different cities now, but you also see them much less. And so it's easier to fall out of contact with them, and just like harder to maintain these very close friendships over time. So there's like a certain wisdom in staying in one place from your teens or early 20s that I didn't understand or didn't recognize when I was that age. And I probably looked down a little bit, as bad as that is to say, on like people who sort of stayed in one place. So like, there's so much adventuring you could do. Like why aren't you experiencing all these other cultures and doing all this other stuff? But as I get older, I'm like, there was like some serious wisdom in people who are just like, no, this is my place. I'm going to set down roots here. I'm going to make this my home. And like, I'll travel and stuff. I'll go on vacations, but I don't actually feel the desire to move away for 10 years and then maybe come back.
Beautiful answer. Nice.
Yeah, you're right. We chose such different subjects. It's so funny. I don't want to know anything personal about you, bro.
No, you already know it. Yeah.
Okay, my fourth subject, actually we touched on this briefly, is like nation building. Let's say, so by nation building, I mean, so other nations, say the US, it like goes into a country that has not been prospering, let's say, and like tries to, maybe an undemocratic country or something, and tries to, set up institutions so that they'll like have democracy and whatnot. Anyway, so what's your general take on that project?
Yeah, well, so let me add some color to the question, which I know but the audience might not. So, before I was popper pilled, the person who had the biggest impact on me and still arguably does was Christopher Hitchens. And I got into reading everything he wrote and watching all of his debates and stuff. And I was, maybe 20. And he had a big impact on me in the sense that he taught me how powerful knowledge is, and how learning for its own sake and arguing for its own sake is an intrinsically valuable thing to do. And so watching him speak, and just the eloquence and the breadth of topics he could touch was something I just tried to model myself after. One of the subjects he touched, quite controversially, was the Iraq War. And the Iraq War was a major thing that I studied through his lens, but also through the lens of him debating with everybody else at the time. And so that puts me slightly at odds with the current climate, where people talk about the Iraq War as purely a failed experiment. Because I haven't really found anyone who's addressed his arguments that I find to be persuasive. Maybe we could do an episode on that.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
So the project of nation building, I think the Iraq War was a tragedy in many ways, but I don't think, as many people do, that it was a failure. It was a failure to do the project that they had set out to build, which was create a thriving democracy in Iraq. And for many reasons that did not work nearly as well as they would have wanted. And so it was a failure with regards to their aspirations. But to actually use a counterfactual lens, I think it was not a failure in the sense of Iraq is doing better today than it would have done had Saddam remained in power. And for people who are immediately going to be up at arms at me for saying that, first thing I would say is when I say Iraq, you also have to include Kurdistan, which is often not talked about. And Kurdistan was the subject of massive chemical weapons attacks in the Anfal campaign. And now Kurdistan is doing quite well. I think I heard Dexter Filkins talk about this a couple of years ago, where if you go there, there's like Jaguar dealerships and Starbucks. If you read, I'm an Iraqi in 2025, and what are conditions like here right now on Reddit, you'll see a big mixed bag. But one thing that has to be acknowledged is that the Iraqis can use the internet and can connect to people online, where under Saddam, it was death to have a satellite dish. And so I think that when people analyze Iraq, they have to analyze it both through the lens of its failure, or the United States' failure to accomplish all of the things that they said that they were going to accomplish, as well as the many, many blunders they made, such as disbanding the Iraqi army, which was a terrible idea. But one also has to compare it to its other comparable countries. And I would say another comparable country is Syria. And Iraq is doing significantly better than Syria. So Syria also had a Ba'athist regime with Bashar al-Assad. And Syria collapsed into a brutal civil war that destroyed the entire country for 10 years after the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring didn't happen in Iraq because Iraq had underwent that process earlier. One also might compare it to North Korea. North Korea has nuclear bombs. Iraq didn't have nuclear bombs, but it is not true to say that there were no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. There were all sorts of chemical weapons found, and there was a whole book written by a guy whose name I'm blanking on, but the book title was, I believe, The Bomb in My Backyard. And he was an Iraqi nuclear scientist who was talking about how Saddam was trying to get nuclear weapons. And so I think one has to analyze Iraq through the lens of comparisons to other countries today. And under that rubric, it's doing much better than it would have done had Saddam remained in power or his children, his psychopathic children, taken over. That doesn't fully address your question about nation building. So nation building, I don't think should be discussed purely in terms of Iraq. I think you also have to include Germany. You also have to include Japan. Both of these were nation building efforts that were incredibly successful and were able to bring previous enemy countries into the global liberal order. And now both Japan and Germany are doing quite well. And now we compare it to the Trump admin, who isn't interested in this at all and just wants to decapitate regimes and then just let them fester. And so no matter, we can say a lot of negative things about the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we need to talk about the failures and prevent it from happening again. But I don't think the lesson should be we can never try, and we should never try, and all attempts at trying are futile, because what does that leave you with? It leaves you with just bombing and never attempting to repair anything. And so I think that nation building is now a dirty word, and everyone just laughs and sneers at you if you talk about it. But I think the goal was noble, and we must learn from the failures. But I don't think we should discount it forever onwards, because there are examples, Japan and Germany, of where it has worked well. And so I would much prefer a American government that at least tries to nation build compared to one that we see right now, which just decapitates and moves on and just takes the oil. And essentially Trump has taken all of the left-wing critiques, most of which were bullshit about the Iraq war, and just said, yeah, I was just going to do all those things that they said that the Bush government was doing, when it went I still hear this today, that Iraq was a war for oil. No, it was not a war for oil. If anyone says that, tell them to read Steve Cole. So he wrote a book talking called Inside Exxon Mobil, I believe, where he just says that like if you are a oil company, what you want and how you make your money is stability. So you dig a hole. That's really risky because most of the holes you dig are not going to lead to oil. And then when you find a hole that does have oil, then you want to sit on it for 30, 40 years and just profit. And so what that means is that companies will absolutely do deals with stable dictatorships and stable autocratic regimes, but they are not at all interested in creating instability in order to then get the oil afterwards, because instability is not something you can make year or 2 or 3, 4 year plans on. And if anyone thinks that Iraq was a war for oil, just look at the meeting where Trump brought in all the oil execs into his boardroom to talk about Venezuela. And they're all like, I don't know if I want to go there. Like, you can't just take their oil. You need to also build infrastructure, and you need to also like build refineries and distribution networks. And this is not something you can just do. Another way to see that Iraq was not a war for oil is to look at the oil auctions that the Americans put on, I think in 2009, either 2009 or 2011, where they just did these open oil auctions. And I think China and Russia got a lot of the contracts, but the Americans did not get too many contracts. This is not something that you would do as an American government if you were there, in fact, to steal oil. So I think that the nation-building conversation has been so polluted by bad faith actors such as Noam Chomsky, such as Glenn Greenwald, such as Mehdi Hassan, who have sneered at the face of a noble effort and not learned from the mistakes and realized that the effort is still noble, but instead just attacked the goal in the first place. And now we are seeing the effects of American interventionism when that's no longer a North Star. And that scares me much more than an American intervention where they at least are trying to rebuild after they intervene.
Nice. Great answer. Maybe alongside our foray into the open society and its enemies, we can do a couple standalone episodes on various issues in geopolitics. I think we need to maybe enter our geopolitics era as a podcast.
Yeah,
that could be fun.
I think it's about time. It's about time. So I have 2 questions, and one is more of like a wind down one. One is maybe a bigger one. I'm just going to ask you both of them, and then you can decide if you want to choose one or the other. So another huge component of your life and your work that we rarely get to talk about in the podcast is math. Math and proofs, which is something I will forever admire you for, because I wish I could do what you can do. I can't, but it's always one of many reasons why I look up to you. But let's say we didn't have a philosophy podcast. Let's say we had a math podcast. And the goal of our podcast was to excite, let's say, bright high school students or first, second year undergrads on topics in mathematics. What subjects would you cover in this hypothetical podcast? How would you get people excited about the beauty of mathematics, who maybe don't know what it's like to be a practicing mathematician compared to someone who just does recreational questions in textbooks? So that's question number 1. How would you excite people about math if we had a podcast on that subject? And the second question, take your pick, is EA related. But not in a negative way. So one aspect of EA, which I believe you undertook, was the Giving What We Can pledge. And I'm assuming maybe this is not the case, that you're still giving away a certain portion of your income every month. And I would just like to give you the opportunity to shout out some of the organizations that you're a big fan of and that you think maybe more people should donate to, that we perhaps haven't talked about before.
Yeah, I don't think I have a great answer to the math one, to be honest. I could tell them why I find it fun and illuminating and like what's so nice about it. But I do think there's a bit of a personality characteristic like you have to possess. And I wouldn't want to push someone into studying math or try and convince them to study math if they didn't like it. And my sense is like most people probably wouldn't like it. I think the fact of the matter is that most, especially pure math that you're going to be doing at the research level, so if you're pushing the frontiers of pure math, say as a research mathematician day to day, I do think most of that is practically quite useless. So I think like if we're trying to deceive ourselves into saying all of this is useful somehow, that's just not true. I think much of it will end up being something like very nice poetry, akin to that in the sense that it's beautiful. And for those who like enjoy math, it can be exciting and inspiring to look at. But in terms of translating into technological progress, the chances of that are very low. On the other hand, I think that's actually true of a lot of quote unquote basic research, foundational research, right? That's true of a lot of fundamental chemistry and biology where you're like studying the properties of various proteins, various atoms, etc. You're not sure if this is going to pan out at the end of the day. So I think if you're doing research in pure maths, and you want to think about yourself as somewhere along the frontier of like humanity's progress, concrete material progress. I think the way you should think about it is like, well, we don't know what math is actually going to be useful 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years hence. And so I should view myself as part of this larger project of pushing the frontiers of knowledge. And some of these frontiers will end up being very useful, and we can't predict which beforehand. And so I'm part of a larger project of people who have all signed up for this mission of trying to push the frontiers simultaneously. And some of us will get lucky and our work will end up translating into prosperity in some way, but we don't know which. So we all just have to like sort of do our duty in some ways. And some of it will work out. You just have to trust in that process in some way. So to view yourself as sort of this larger collaboration, I think is helpful. Now, some people are just fine doing the equivalent of like writing poetry, doing something artistically valuable. Like, this is the Hardy type of view where he's sort of proud that a lot of pure math doesn't have applications. And, that's also fine. I think we want people writing poetry and we want people proving beautiful theorems, even if they're useless. But I think you have to be honest with yourself that like a lot of this is sort of useless at the end of the day. I think statistics is interesting because I think statistics straddles this line where there's lots of interesting math going on, but a lot of it is pretty well motivated by methodological problems in practice. And, the reason I ended up going into statistics is because you get to do a lot of interesting math, but statistics is always that sort of engine that's there in the background driving a lot of scientific discovery. So whenever people are talking about like discovery of various drugs or vitamins or stuff like this, often like at the bottom there was some statistical claim, and it's not always a super complicated one. Like the statistics to do it might have been well known for a long time, but there's always room to like improve that methodology by a little bit. And so it sort of straddles this nice world of like cool measure theory and math, but also sort of directly translating and in very subtle ways into the background of like most of the stuff we care about. So that tends to be how I sell statistics. Re-EA, I guess, just to quickly tackle that question, I would say, my go-tos are still, Give Directly, which is just cash transfers to poor people, or just the GiveWell fund, and then they decide based on whatever their current research is where things go. I will say I having a slight crisis of conscience on that front, just because I'm starting to buy Angus Deaton's work sort of more and more that aid is not beneficial and sometimes detrimental. Like external aid from countries can sometimes be detrimental for the long-term development of countries, because it at least doesn't help prop up institutions in developing countries, and sometimes actually actively erodes them. Because people just like depend on getting cash transfers from rich countries like the US instead of investing in their local institutions and economies. And I think I am starting to buy more and more the criticism that maybe institutions are need to come first when it comes to development. And anyway, there's all this. Development economics has it undergoes these sorts of swings in terms of like what we think is important and like how to actually alleviate poverty on a long-term scale and in a sustainable way. And I'm sort of undecided about where I think about this stuff now. So it's a complicated question.
So I'm not familiar with Angus Deaton's work, but maybe you could plug a few papers, books, blogs, something that both I and listeners could follow up on.
Actually, one thing I'll maybe just plug is he has a debate probably 5 or 10 years ago now with Banerjee, whose first name I'm forgetting, but Banerjee and Duflo. Banerjee and Duflo really kickstarted like the focus on RCTs in development economics, right? So they wanted to like give money to one village, not to another village, and then see like did the village that got money, are they doing better 5 years later, sort of thing. And so it was like the credibility revolution in development economics. And Deaton is skeptical, one, that we can actually learn that much from RCTs because of like cultural differences and methodological critiques, but two, is critical that external aid is doing anything at all, and in fact often argues that like it's sort of, you know, it's making these countries reliable on external funding instead of developing on their own, which you know, he's definitely not coming at it from any sort of woke leftist lens, but like has some of those flavors, but like that doesn't mean it's not true, right? So like we're interested in what's true, not who's right here. And I mean, I think I just have, as I've gotten older, one of the ways I've sort of changed my mind is just like how much institutions and culture matters, like having a culture of people who like respect norms, respect laws, and and trust each other, like these sort of high trust societies versus low trust societies. All that matters a lot. And are we eroding those sorts of dynamics in countries by making them dependent on external handouts and whatnot? And now, I'm not quite sure where I land on that question at the moment, but I think it's an important question to think about. So that's made me more hesitant recently to
we should totally do an episode on that. Just what your comments made me think of is a subject that has been on my list to study, but I haven't studied yet, which is welfare. Right? Yeah, exactly. Because it sounds like this is like,
it's like the international
domestic welfare critique, except made international. And so, so I don't have an opinion on that yet, but there seems like an interesting duality between the give directly style critique and welfare critiques.
Yeah.
Nice. Final question.
Yeah. All right. You ready for my final question?
Hit me.
Dude, I feel so bad. I feel like you were like, you know, you're so wholesome and you're like trying to get to know me and trying to get the audience to know me. And then I'm asking you zero things about yourself and all these random questions. Okay. My fifth question was, it just says incest. What do you think about incest?
Pro. That's hilarious. Incest. What do I think about incest?
So let me say this. Maybe let's set it up a bit. In and of itself, is it morally wrong? So forget so a lot of the criticisms of incest are like, well, the consequences could be bad. So because if you have a kid, then the kid is more likely to have various genetic defects. Therefore, incest is bad. Okay, fine. But what if you took procreation off the table and just talk about the actual dynamics of incest? Like, you know, brother and sister, they want to be, you know, they want to be together, etc. Is it bad beyond the consequences for potential offspring?
And of course, ruling out like rape and stuff.
So it's everything's consensual, right? So like,
so this is the
situation. Yeah,
the Jonathan Haidt thought experiment, right?
Exactly.
Basically, no, I don't think it's wrong. I think that I'm a consequentialist through and through, and if you stipulate that there are no consequences, bad consequences, then it may be icky. It may not be something I want to think about very much. But no, I don't think it's wrong. No, I think that it's a great example, actually, of like where consequentialism shows its teeth, because Haidt set up all of these questions. So for the listener, Ben's referring to Haidt's
The Righteous Mind.
The Righteous Mind. Thank you. Yeah. Where Haidt comes up with 4 or 5 questions that he uses to push people's intuitions around. One of which is, a brother and a sister go out into a cabin somewhere and they use protection and they just make sweet, passionate sibling love to one another. And it makes their relationship closer, and they leave and everyone is just happier than when they started. And then the question is that wrong? And everyone that he polled just were looking for ways to justify their intuition that is wrong. Whereas I just take it as a brute fact that if the consequences are not bad, then my intuitions are in fact wrong. and I just need to grapple with that. And like, let's not forget that the intuitions that I think most of us have that it's like icky is what people had with the gay marriage debate, and also what people had with like interracial debates too. But both of these cases, there were no negative consequences, and you just got to get over the ick. Got to get over the ick. And I think this is less hypothetical and more real when it comes to like first cousin marriages and stuff, which I don't know the legalities there. I believe I heard somewhere, listeners fact check me, that it was illegal in certain states, in the States, but not illegal in others. Again, please fact check all of the things I'm saying here. But if states have made this illegal, if states have legalized this, and they've obviously put in place all of the various legal measures that would be needed to make sure that it's not, rape or non-consensual or anything to that effect, then I think that it should be legal, and that we just got to get over our ick.
Nice. What a great way to end it. Get over the ick.
Yeah. Pro incest. Yeah. Great way to frame it. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Nice, man.
Nice.
Well, we made it. I heard somewhere that if you want to start a podcast, just think about nothing except getting to episode 50. And we've now got to episode 100. So I feel like we can finally say we have made it as podcast.
At some point, I'll stop being embarrassed and we'll start telling people that I have a podcast. But
I never tell anybody.
I have not reached that point yet. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I think it's still cringe. It's still cringe to tell people you have a podcast. But anyways. All right, man. Enjoy the rest of your day. Go enjoy that sun and go dance the night away. Good start.
All right. Take care.